So, in our final part of this episode, we're looking at sustainability in surveying. And it's a big part of what Sava are doing at the moment in terms of research, I think you mentioned earlier, but it's also a theme we're having throughout this sort of series of the podcast. It seems there's a lot of focus at the moment on sustainability, and we're becoming a lot more aware of. I think we've
We
just had
are.
it announced, and you'll be able to work out when we've recorded this, but we've just had it announced that it was the hottest September ever by quite a margin. Um, I suppose what are you seeing first in terms of the changes in the way that sustainability has been looked at, and what's Arva doing around that at the moment?
Well, that's really
Mm.
interesting. We've always so our diploma maps against the RICS pathway for residential survey and valuation. But when we created it 8 years ago, the pathway didn't include anything around sustainability. And but because of our history as a business, we introduced something we called sort of like an energy module. And basically, what that meant was that as part of the learning, you were we would train you to be able to provide interpretation and advice based on around an EPC. So if the EPC said put PV on your roof, then very straightforward. It was kind of like, well, you can, but before you put the PV panels on the roof, you need to consider the roof covering, or you need to strengthen the timbers, or you're in a listed building and therefore it's not going to, all of that good stuff. So we'd always had that in from the very beginning. And when we introduced it, I had quite a few people raise an eyebrow and go, "Why have you got that in, Hilary?" And I gave up. I have to be honest with you. I can remember giving up justifying it and just kind of going, because I say so, kind of thing, and being a little bit, dictatorial. And the world has kind of caught up with us a bit.
Yeah.
So we recently strengthened that element of what we do. We have much more now on the sort of the broader concepts around sustainability and why it matters. And we have really lucky to work with Kate Charrington and Tim Kenny, who
Yeah.
deliver those both passionate surveyors, competent surveyors. Kate comes from a valuation background. Tim is more of a building surveyor, but both very passionate about sustainability. And so we've really strengthened that side and that element of the training. And yeah, and in a way, the rest of the world has kind of caught up with us. And to the best of my knowledge, we were the first to do anything like this as part of the core competence. And now it's an RICS, part of the RICS competencies, but it wasn't when we started. And I think it's and again, even that has changing. It was about 4, maybe 5 years ago, the Bank of England put a requirement on, as I understand it, through it requires that lending industry demonstrates resilience against climate change. And the first lender to really embrace that has been Nationwide, and Nationwide requiring its valuers to consider the EPC as part of the valuation process. So it's beginning to kind of filter through, and it's really interesting. There's been a rush over the last year, 18 months, of surveyors sort of getting themselves qualified as domestic energy assessors, not because they're going to be offering EPCs, but because they need the competence to be able to properly evaluate an EPC and make an observation on an EPC. And you can't do that unless you understand how an EPC is created. So I think it's not going to go away. You're absolutely right. We had last year, we had 40 degrees or whatever it was here in Milton Keynes in July. This year we had a hot June, but the whole year, I mean, well, we've had a rotten summer. Europe has been absolutely cooking.
Mm.
And there've been wildfires. It's it's a fact of life, and it's not going to get better. Um, and we are going to have to really start addressing the way that we live in our houses and the way that we occupy our houses. And I have to say, I watched some new builds going up quite recently here in Milton Keynes, and I was just appalled at the fact that not one of them has had any renewable technologies incorporated into it. It was a small builder. It wasn't a major house builder. To my mind, they should have known better. Those new, I find it gobsmacking that
Yeah.
we're still building modern new houses today that don't have renewable technologies incorporated into them. I think it's just appalling because we've got to change. And
Yes.
we can't knock everything down. My
No.
house is a Victorian house. It's got loads of embedded carbon into it. There's not a lot I
Mm,
can do with it. But I've got to, and I will be. It's a bit of a saga with my house at the moment and repairs that are going on. But next year it'll be PV on the roof, and I'm looking at battery
mm.
because that's a way that I can make a difference.
Yeah, that's a good point because knocking things down and building new is probably going to be a higher carbon impact than the sort of the variable impact of
Yeah,
the
yeah,
existing house.
yeah,
I suppose just in terms of other episodes, we spoke to Kate actually on our first episode of the series,
yeah,
which will be coming out. So that's another one interesting one to look back
yeah.
at on sustainability.
She's very passionate about it. She's yeah, and yeah, and rightly so. Yeah,
Yeah, definitely. I think it's an interesting one that you say around the new builds as well, because one of the other episodes that's coming out on this season is around improving a couple of things, I suppose. One is biodiversity in housing, and one is around well-being in housing. And we were
yes,
discussing about the fact there's nothing built into a lot of new builds, like you say, are either around sustainability aspects of, I don't know, PV panels or solar,
yeah,
whatever,
yeah,
um, and um, and even things like bird boxes or
yeah,
bee bricks and
yeah,
stuff like that.
yeah.
Nothing to help
It's
help
not,
out.
it's not difficult to do. You absolutely, like you say, you can get bee bricks, you can get Swift. Here in Wolverton, there's been a big push to sell Swift bricks for
Yes,
Martins and Swifts because their populations have really plummeted, and you can easily just like a bee brick. It's just the concept of just don't put an ordinary brick in, put a Swift brick in. It's not difficult to do, and it's it this stuff isn't rocket science. But we've just got to sort of, you've got to think differently. You've got to be able to go to Wix or wherever you buy your building materials from, and you've got to be able to buy, you know, 200 standard bricks, and you've also got to be able to easily buy a Swift brick or a B brick or whatever it may be, or bat boxes. Yeah, yeah, we need to be much more sort of kind of imaginative, and it's the whole supply chain.
yeah, and I agree with that. If you're someone that's sort of, I suppose, starting to realise that you need to be commenting more about, or not just commenting more about the environmental aspects within a report, but actually learning enough about it to be able to do so. Where do people, where can surveyors start learning about that, other than just sort of googling? Are there courses they can look at around the sustainability aspects?
So yeah, so sustainability. Well, we've got some sort of small CPD modules around sustainability that are part of our which extracted from our diploma, and they're available for people to access. But you're right. I think it's but it doesn't have to be rocket science. It's thinking about little simple things like gutters, for example. So all surveyors are used to looking at gutters and making an observation that the gutters are sagging or the brackets are broken, whatever it may be. But actually, if we are as we address climate change, we're going to have more extreme weather events. So actually, should you not be just sort of saying, in the event of more frequent rainstorms, for example, are the gutters big enough? You know, or actually, should we be saying to customers, when you repair your guttering, make sure you replace it with a bigger gutter so that it's more able to wick the water away from the property. Some of this stuff is not, it's not rocket science. It's, and I think, and actually I think it's quite important. If you understand how an EPC is created, then, and an EPC, I won't talk about guttering, for example, but if you understand how an EPC is just generated, uh, at least that will then at least give you the ability to sort of note some key uh, key things that can make some significant changes. It amazes me, for example, that surveyors tend not to comment on a radiator or comment on a boiler. So, but it's easy to work out the age of a boiler, and you'll know that if a boiler is over, well, if you know the model and make of boiler, you can get information on its efficiency. But if you know, even if you know the age of a boiler, if you know it was installed 8, 10 years ago, you know that it's not going to be running as efficiently as a modern boiler, even if that modern boiler is the same A rating as the old boiler. So and radiators, just you can look at a radiator in a hard water area, and if it's an old radiator with old controls, you can make a pretty good assessment of the fact that those radiators are probably not going to be working particularly efficiently, in which case you're going to be chunking out, you're going to be burning the gas in the boiler, and it's not just not going to be getting around the system. And I think surveyors could begin to make those sorts of observations that would begin to make a difference. I can tell you, switching out radiators in my house from old, not that old, but when I moved in, I knew that they needed replacing. Switching them out to modern radiators, I'm not using any more gas, not change the boiler, but I'm making the place more comfortable, and therefore, by definition, I'm actually, I've not got the heating on for as long. So it's little things like that, sort of beginning to make sort of observations about how can I change. I don't know how many surveyors are making commentary on suitability of properties for EV charge points, for example. I live
Mm.
in a terraced house. My house isn't suitable for an EV charge point, but there's one just around the corner outside the co-op. Would a surveyor make that comment on about that accessibility if they were surveying my house at the moment? I don't know. Should they
That's
discuss?
that's a
You
good
know.
question. I suppose if you're a bit more cynical about all of this and sort of thinking my job is to go and comment on the state of the property as it is now, do you need to then be talking about the environmental aspects that potentially when you replace the gutters, it'd be good to have bigger ones, or the EV aspect? Is it, or is it a requirement that that soon will come in that they're going to have to talk about it?
Well, the home survey standard, which is the RICS sort of kind of guidance for this, it does require surveyors to sort of kind of consider sustainability and be able to comment on the EPC. But I was talking to Larry Russon only this morning, and I think it's going to be reviewed again next year. And if people like Kate Charrington and Tim Kenny have got anything to do with it, then yeah, and in fact, it's one of those things, and I think the lenders are driving it too. I think the lenders will really drive this once they've got their heads around quite how they can make an impact. If they're lending on a property for 25, 30 years, it's in their interests to make sure that that property is still an attractive purchase in 25, 30 years. So they're going to really start driving surveyors to think about how sustainable this property, in 25 years time, is this still going to be an attractive purchase? Now, it's yeah, you could argue to the cows come home about how difficult that is and crystal balls and all of that, but on the basis of what we do know, and on the basis of the changes that have happened over the last 10 years or so, it's not beyond, I think, the wit of man to sort of start saying, okay, it's likely Victorian properties in an urban area with a gas boiler, is this property going to be suitable for air source heat pumps? Yes or no? And if not, why not? And if yes, just beginning to make reference to some of those new technologies, even if the individual has got no intention of putting those technologies in at all.
I think the other thing I always think is a bit interesting actually around this is looking at newer, maybe not technologies, but materials that are available. Is which ones are going to be suitable in 20 years time, and which ones are going to become the new, asbestos, for example, or um, aerated concrete. Where suddenly actually what you thought was going to be a good suggestion ends up not being, but that's possibly a separate challenge and something we won't know until it comes up. I think one other thing I saw you talk about recently on LinkedIn was around sort of the quality of housing stock and how that impacts the well-being of people, and I think that probably ties in with the energy efficiency aspects. What are you seeing, I suppose, as our last question, around the key possible key challenges around improving the quality of housing stock around energy efficiency and so on?
Well, gosh, well, improving the quality of housing. I think we've got we've got to get better at making sure our properties are properly maintained, because a damp house is a cold house. So if nothing else, we've got to really understand about maintenance and recognizing that properties need maintenance and when they need maintenance. Now, I can talk, and I completely get how difficult this is, because I'm in the business and I'm trying to find tradesmen at the moment to do some repairs on my house, and it's blooming difficult, let me tell you. But for me, it's kind of like, that's there's no point sticking on retrofit insulation if you really aren't clear about the sort of the what you're sticking it onto and how it all kind of hangs together. I am concerned, if I'm honest with you, that some of these sort of retrofit schemes are potentially not. I've seen some terrible examples of sort of poorly installed insulation, for example. But also, some of these technologies are complicated and difficult, and it's about having controls that are understandable, and it's about having wording that explains to a consumer about why it will feel different. So a good example is, going back to Westbury, I recently installed some radiant heat panels in some of the rooms at Westbury, and I've had complaints that it's cold. Well, it is not. So they don't work by heating the air, they work by heating you and the physical things in the room. So when you walk into the room, you won't be hit with warm air like you would if it was a central heated room. You'll be in the room and then you'll begin to feel the warmth and the effect of the heating. So
Mm.
it's about translating that to lay people, and that's hard work. I've had to sort of explain to people over and over again why it doesn't work the same way. And the heat panels that we got and were installed and were brilliant. What we can't do is match up the controls to get the controls to work simply for individuals. So we've got to, it's kind of all those sort of niggly little bits of the jigsaw puzzle we've got to get right. And, and uh, yeah, and in insulation, you can't insulate the wall of a house if you've got a fence against it without taking the fence down, and I've seen insulation cut round fencing, just not going to work. So yeah,
That's
it's just, yeah.
I'm sure there'll be many funny stories of, well, not funny, but stories like that come up. um, I think one of the challenges, I think, over the next few years is going to be how rapidly the technology will change and the options that come about. So it'll be trying to keep up with what's available, how it works, and as you say, how to then communicate the the impacts of, or of different options that you can
Yeah,
potentially
yeah.
install. But
I mean, the next are, rack concrete. I mean, we're not going to know about those sorts of things until they sort of kind of come and hit us, and um, yeah, it would just not, and I think the other thing as well is building safety and uh, building control, and that's now sort of getting regulated and sort of being looked at as a response to sort of, the Building Safety Act, which was the response to Grenfell. But that's a good
yeah,
example, a technology that just was not properly installed. Um, was the wrongly specified technology for the wrong space, and then wasn't properly installed with the right safety features, and people died. Yeah, so
yeah, it's a difficult one. That was tragic. I remember that, and I still drive past it and see that.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
But I think there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for the housing stuff. And there's a lot of negative stories at the moment in terms of things going wrong and mold in houses and all those types of things. But there's certainly a lot of opportunity, I suppose, with that to start improving things.
Yes, I mean, I
Yeah.
think we're sort of starting from quite a low point. I mean, we can only go up the hill. Well, certainly from some
Yeah.
examples of certainly social housing and private landlords, etc. You do hear horror stories.
Mm.
Um, but I think surveyors. Well, and it's interesting as one of the growing areas of lending, I've been told, is to do with equity release, and equity release lenders do insist on condition surveys because obviously the way that works is they then get the asset at the end of the process, and they need the asset to be in good condition. And maybe surveyors need to start thinking about providing sort of interim packages around sort of interim surveys. If you had a customer that bought a house 10 years ago and you did a survey for them, are they still there? If they are still there, is it worth saying, getting in touch with them and saying, I could do a survey for you now that would give you some repair. You would if you were managing if you were a commercial property manager, you would get schedules of works done, you'd get schedules of condition, you would have building surveyors come around every so often and sort of kind of give you a planned maintenance um, um, sort of program.
Yeah.
We could be doing more of that for some of our customers. Yeah, a lot of people, without doubt, wouldn't pay for it, but I think a lot of people would. Somebody like my mum would have paid for somebody to tell her what she needed to do just to make sure the house stayed warm and watertight. Something that I would do. You don't need to have a huge amount of education to sort of to um to to sort of kind of buy into that sort of idea. And I've never seen a surveyor offer that idea for everybody. All those building surveyors out there.
It's a good idea, I think, because I agree. Yeah, not everyone would go for it, but just because not wanting to spend money. But I think there'll be plenty that would because of the fear of getting a contract around that sells them the wrong thing, and so they've got information up front. They're a bit more confident with their potential route forward.
Yeah,
And from a business perspective, it's rather than just looking at leads that you've got as we'll do a single job for them. We'll never hear from them for another 20
yeah,
years.
yeah.
That's just, you can start to achieve a lot more from your previous customer base.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how often we move house now, but moving house is such a stressful business. I think we tend to stay put longer than. So if you did a survey for somebody, and that or you think they might still be there, and even if they have gone, if you write to the owner, that owner might pick it up and sort of run with it. So yeah, I think it's something that surveyors could sort of start looking at more. And also, and if you do EPCs, you have to have an EPC if you move house. Well, why not offer EPCs as well? And then actually alongside the EPC, offer a really sensible sort of suggested program of works that you could actually do. Rather than just because the EPC just sort of chucks out all of these recommendations. Well, actually, so say, well, okay, you could do these works, this is the product that we train on, the idea, the concept we train. You could do these things, and and these will be the benefits for you. Yeah, I think there's all sorts of ways surveyors could be more engaged with people who are not moving house and actually staying put. Um, more of a planned maintenance and planned improvement sort of approach.
Yeah, that's, I think, a lovely idea to finish on there around how people can better engage. So thank you very much for coming on today, Hilary. If anyone wants to get in touch with you or Sava about sort of whether it's a student looking at a course or whether it's a
Yep.
surveyor looking at the other aspects, how do they get in touch?
So they can, the best way to get in touch with us is hello@sava.co.uk. And because that's the inbox that people are on all the time. So drop us an email to hello@sava, and we'll pick it up from there. But there's also our website, which is www.sava.co.uk, which has got, it's quite complicated, but it relatively easily to navigate, but you'll see the whole myriad of what we do and where we sort of fit into things. So yeah, that'd be great.
Perfect. Well, thanks again for coming on.